Good afternoon and a really warm welcome to all of you joining us for our third Green Shoots webinar and the second of 2023. My name is Joe Crehan and I'm an investment manager and clean energy specialist at Greenbank based in Glasgow, and will be chairing today's event. Our topic today is food and energy security on a warming planet. Next slide, please. We have an all Scottish cast for this Green Shoots event and two excellent speakers lined up. David Farquhar, who is CEO of global vertical farming technology company Intelligent Growth Solutions, and Morag, who is Director of Policy at Scottish Renewables, a key voice of the renewable energy industry in Scotland. For those that are new to Greenbank, we are the specialist ethical, sustainable and impact investment business within Rathbones Group. We've been managing bespoke portfolios for a range of private clients, charities and trusts for over 20 years, which combine their unique sustainability and financial requirements. We have a long track record of using our investor voice to create positive environmental or social change on a diverse range of issues, from climate change to modern slavery and health and nutrition, both through engaging directly with the companies we invest in, but also by engaging with a wide range of NGOs, policymakers and standard setters with the ambition of enabling wider systems change. The Greenbank team is spread across Bristol, London, Liverpool, Edinburgh and Glasgow. Please do reach out to us via the contact details on our website if you'd like to learn more about our services. Next slide, please. So onto the agenda and some housekeeping. I'll be giving a short introduction and then we'll have two 10-minute presentations from David and Morag, followed by Q&A. If you'd like to submit a question for the panel discussion at the end, please do so via the engagement panel on the right of your screen. You're also welcome to post your questions anonymously if you prefer. We've already received some great questions from you all as you've registered, so thank you for those. We've got some Greenbank publications available for you to download from the engagement panel on the right side of the screen, using our recent, in particular, our recent engagement review and our Investor Day reviews from 2021 through to 2023, where we covered themes ranging from food systems to unlocking a net zero future. Throughout the presentations, if you're on social media, please use the hashtags #GreenbankInvestments and #GreenShoots. If you do happen to lose connection, then please try and rejoin through the event link. And if you're having any issues using the conference portal, then click the headphone mic icon in the top right corner, which is also available on the engagement panel under technical support. We would also be grateful if you could fill in a feedback form at the end of the webinar, which should take no more than 2 to 3 minutes. Your thoughts on how we can enhance and adapt our webinars are always much appreciated. So let's get started. In 2022 and 2023, geopolitical events shocked the world with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. In addition to the tragic humanitarian impact of a major conflict, there were significant global economic implications that have rocked global markets. Food and energy prices surged in response to the conflict, fueling an ongoing cost of living crisis. The conflict plunged the world into an energy crisis that led to spiraling inflation and emergency measures to tackle energy security, one of the two issues we'll be exploring over the next 40 minutes. Our legacy energy system has been built around a strong reliance on natural gas, which is procured through global markets and supply chains and relies on a number of major gas-producing states and businesses. However, we were in fact already in the grips of an energy crunch even before Russia's invasion began. This started with gas reserves being depleted by a long cold winter in 2020 to 21, followed by a strong rebound in energy demand as economies roared back to life, as COVID restrictions were lifted and demand for goods soared. There are other factors which added to the crunch from the supply side, such as more than half of France's nuclear fleet being out of service for most of the year, and lower wind speeds across Europe. This came to a head in 2021, when due to severely constrained supply of gas relative to demand, gas and electricity prices shot up, causing a number of UK electricity suppliers to go bust. It was next year in 2022, in the grip of this energy crunch, that Russia then invaded Ukraine, culminating in the closure of Nord Stream 1 and a huge further escalation in electricity prices as gas prices skyrocketed. Next slide, please. This crisis brought the issue of energy security to the forefront of government's agendas. It exposed the vulnerability of our current energy system with its dependence on a global supply chain for natural gas, and resulted in extreme social and economic hardship. It required government and central bank intervention and a subsequent rapid rise in interest rates across the globe to fight soaring inflation. Next slide, please. A key feature of the European response to the crisis, outlined in a European Commission plan called Repower EU, was to reduce dependence on Russian gas by significantly accelerating renewables, improving energy efficiency, and turning to the liquefied natural gas or LNG market to plug the remaining shorter-term gaps created by the Russian gas shortfall. As the slide shows, this had quite an impact, with energy demand falling an impressive 20%. Renewables contributed significantly to electricity generation at just shy of 40%. While LNG helped replace Russian gas, turning to new sources of gas is problematic from an environmental perspective. Natural gas is, of course, a fossil fuel, which contributes to increasing global carbon dioxide emissions. And to avoid the worst effects of climate change, there's already a transition underway to move away from fossil fuels and towards cleaner forms of generation, such as renewable energy. The energy crisis therefore added an energy security imperative to the existing environmental one. Given these two imperatives, one of the questions we'll be asking today is, can a clean energy-based system provide energy security? Morag will be answering this question in the UK and Scottish context, providing some detail on what a net zero energy system would look like and how achievable it is. Now, despite the transition to clean sources of energy being underway, emissions from energy generation have continued to increase, setting an all-time high in 2022 of 36.8 gigatons. Next slide, please. The risks of planet warming due to increasing carbon emissions have been well documented by climate scientists. July 2023 was confirmed as the hottest month on record by the UN's World Meteorological Organization. The same organization reported earlier this year that the most recent 8 full years from 2015 to 22 were the 8 hottest ever recorded. It's also recently been reported, as shown in the chart at the top of the slide, that the September just passed has been the warmest by a gobsmackingly bananas amount, in the words of climate researcher Zeke Hausfather. The impact of rising emissions on the frequency of extreme weather events, such as flooding and drought, has been underscored by multiple such weather extremes over the last 2 years. These exert a challenging humanitarian impact, and importantly for our discussion, an increasing strain on food security. Next slide, please. Perhaps unsurprisingly, extreme weather has an adverse impact on crop yields, with flooding and drought responsible for reduced harvests across multiple continents. For example, in 2022, floods submerged a third of Pakistan, washing away nearly half the country's crops. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates that climate change has reduced agricultural productivity growth by 21% since 1961, and up to 34% in Africa and Latin America. The diagram on the screen represents this damage via lost calories per capita per day. Next slide, please. This is occurring against the backdrop of a population which is growing and expected to increase from 8 billion to just shy of 10 billion in 2050, requiring a significant increase in food production. And this in turn creates more strain on land, where agriculture already occupies almost half of habitable land, represented by the yellow and turquoise of the slide. Next slide, please. As well as more frequent climate extremes, like energy, our current food systems are also highly vulnerable to geopolitical events. All listening would have experienced the significant level of food price inflation that's taken place over the last 2 years. While this food price inflation was driven in part by the climate impacts we've just looked at, and crop failures in particular regions, the majority was due to the impact of the energy crisis and supply chain disruption resulting from the Ukraine conflict and remaining dislocation from COVID-19. This risk demonstrates the sensitivity and vulnerability of our current food system, one in which food is grown in particular food-producing regions and then transported across a complex global supply chain to meet demand. In the last 2 years, this came under extreme pressure and could well intensify as the planet warms and geopolitical tensions remain very high. It is to this challenge to food security that David will hopefully provide us with an effective technological solution. Now, before I pass over to David, a brief word on how we as Greenbank look at these issues. The risks and opportunities created by sustainability drivers such as food and energy security are integrated into the construction and management of client portfolios. This is undertaken by our in-house ethical, sustainability and impact research team using our sustainable development theme framework. This helps us understand the risks and opportunities arising from these issues while identifying businesses expected to have a positive impact. So now to the first of our expert speakers on a solution to tackling food security. Over to David Farquhar of Intelligent Growth Solutions. Over to you, David. I think you're still on mute, David. If you could unmute yourself first, please. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. I'm the CEO of IGS. We're headquartered in Edinburgh. We have a demo vertical farm up at the James Hutton Institute near Dundee, our main engineering centre in Fife, and subsidiary operations in the United States, Singapore, and now the Middle East. Next, please. So the business is in the game of providing infrastructure to both the farming, agriculture, horticulture, and forestry industries. One of the reasons I was keen to take it over, which I did in 2017, was it was actually founded by a real farmer. So everything that the company does is based upon a knowledge of the markets that we're serving. So this has not come from a purely technological point of view. It's come from the point of view of pragmatic problem solving. We've managed to run 3 institutional funding rounds since I took over, and have absolutely tremendous support from the most active agri-tech investors in the world. Now, they tend to be based in the United States. S2G Ventures is Lucas Walton's fund of Walmart fame. AgFunder does what it says on the tin. They led our Series A with Scottish Enterprise coming in, and then Osprey, who created Osprey Ag Science to invest in us in Manhattan. The Series B round was led by Kofra, the one you can see there, who were the founders of C&A Department Store. The one below it, confusing enough, CA is Cleveland Avenue. That's the family office of the former CEO of McDonald's. And then DC Thompson, another local fund, came in. So we've got an interesting and eclectic mix of VC, family office, and sovereign wealth. Thank you. So one of the things that I learned very quickly is there is no simple single answer to what's making it hard to feed ourselves. It depends, is what I tend to say to investors when they ask for a simple answer. It depends if you are in the Arctic, if you are in a temperate zone, a desert zone, a tropical zone, or the Antarctic. It depends whether you're on an island, in a city, or you are in a rural area. But there will be some subset of the 12 big issues, a little bit like what Joe was talking about earlier, that will come together exactly where you are based, that are making it really hard to grow sufficient food. Thank you. I was born in 1958, and there were 3 billion people on the planet. It had taken us 300,000 years to get to 3 billion. In my lifetime, we will get something close to 10 billion. That is not a straight line. It is an exponential curve. And if you want to really understand it, go to David Attenborough's latest book, which I'll bring up in a minute. But the simple fact is the UN has determined that we're going to have to grow more food in the next 3 decades than in the history of agriculture, somewhere between 8,000 and 10,000 years. And we're going to have to do it at the point where climate change is causing novel climates rather than ones that crops are used to exist. So that's just making it tougher and tougher every year. Next. The other challenge is that, first of all, we grow most of our food in the wrong place. Some academics will tell you that we actually do grow enough food to feed the population at the moment. The problem is it's not in the right place. So these beautiful diagrams are the subregions of the world, or subcontinents of the world, broken into colors for each major continent. And the lines going from one subcontinent to another show the amount of food that is being transported, obviously burning huge amounts of fossil fuels in the process. And we all know that if you want a packet of blueberries from a supermarket in the UK, other than in the summer, it will probably say Peru or Uruguay on it. So we're moving all this food around the world, and you can see by clicking on each of the lines exactly what is being grown and then shipped. But it's 3/4 of everything that we eat, and that goes for the whole world. The other big challenge is that after India and China, if waste was a country, it would be the 3rd largest consumer of food. And actually, the greatest amount of waste, 45%, is in fruit and vegetables. People worry about dairy and meat, but fruit and vegetables are the most wasteful foodstuffs that we eat. So that's why IGS exists. Next. So here we are. Our job is to create agriculture 4.0. The vertical farm that you can see there is 9 meters high. It consists of 4 towers. That's at the James Hutton Institute in Invergowrie, just outside Dundee. Each one of the towers has a 6x7, 42 square meter footprint, which is an important statistic that I'll come to in a moment. We don't do bespoke projects. What we do is we build farms for farmers or other sorts of growers. Just like your phone probably comes in 3 sizes, this thing can be 6, 9, or 12 meters high. Other than that, they're essentially all the same. Next. So if we go inside the vertical farm and you were lying on your back in the middle of it, this is what you would see. 2 sets of racking, one either side, and on the racking, we place 6 meter square trays, exactly the size of a professional snooker table. We can vary the gaps between them to accommodate different crops. So you can see here, the tray on the left has got chilies on it, so we've double spaced that one. But in a normal circumstance, we would have 52 trays in a 9 meter high tower. That means we can grow 52 different things on a footprint of about 42 square meters. And what we're delivering here is crop on the top of each tray and the weather on the bottom of each tray. So you can see the LED lights there delivering the sunlight. Weather is a 3-dimensional system, the sun, the wind, and the rain. So we deliver the sun and the wind through the bottom of the trays, and there's a hoist that delivers irrigation, which is the rain, and moves from tray to tray to tray. It also is fully automated, and we don't have any human beings inside this. You'd be very welcome to come and have a look if you're interested. Next. So we can grow an extremely wide range of things. We've grown over 200 different species and varieties, going from early stage starter plants. You can see some tomatoes on the left there. So starter plants for greenhouses, and then top right, the same strawberries. But then starter plants for the broadacre field. You can see potatoes there in my hand, seed potatoes, which were grown in 75 to 90 days instead of 18 months. And you can see Norway spruce seedling trees. We've just offered to grow sycamores from the seeds that have come from the sycamore gap tree. Down the bottom, you can see lily of the valley for the perfume industry, radishes next to baby turnips, and continually harvested chilies. We can make the chili bush grow to about 2 feet high, and then we switch the light from spring to summer, and we've been harvesting these, taking the fruit off them, and then having them reflower for about 3 years. So this is a chili factory, and there is a world shortage of chilies. Next. So in terms of contributing not just to food security, but to help tackle climate change, there are 6 major things that we can offer. In operating the growing space in the tower, SEPA came to do an analysis, Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and said, you're putting nothing in the watercourse, you're putting nothing into landfill, you're venting nothing to the air, there is nothing here for us to license. It's just about the cleanest industrial process we've ever seen. We can site these things anywhere on preferably brownfield site, preferably co-located with a source of energy, so we can collapse food miles. In terms of the ratio of water required, if you grow a kilo of lettuce in a field, you need 250 litres. In a greenhouse, 25 to 30 litres. In an IGS tower, 1 litre. And that footprint, so 42 square metres will grow about 25 tonnes of crop a year. You would need 4 hectares to do that in a field. That is a 10,000 to 1 footprint ratio, which is what got WWF very excited. And the Attenborough book I referred to there, A Life on Our Planet, talks about the IGS model of vertical farming. Because we have no humans inside, we don't need any pesticides or herbicides or fungicides, and we can use entirely renewables. And we don't have any oil-based lubricants inside, so no hydrocarbons of any sort. The pesticide and hydrocarbon facts mean that we don't need to wash the crop, which will double the shelf life, and greatly reduce the loss of nutrients as a result. Next. So here's where we're taking it. The green diagonal lines are the arable land in the world. The brown circles are where the UN has decided it's severely degraded. The green spots are where we've already got working farms or they're under construction, and the orange spots are where we have a contract to start building them. We're going to be building gigafarms next, and we're calling them gigafarms because they will produce at least 1 billion plants a year. And that is going to make a major contribution to food security in many parts of the world. Next. If you want to, you can watch a film The Economist made about us for COP26, Blood, Sweat and Dreams. They decided there were 15 technologies that could save the planet and that we were one of them. So thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Really fascinating. Now I'd like to invite Morag Watson to speak to the energy security side of this question. So over to you, Morag.
Thank you very much, Joe, and hello everyone. It's lovely to be with you this afternoon. So I'm Director of Policy for Scottish Renewables, and we are the trade body for renewable energy in Scotland. So I represent about 340 different companies working across the whole renewables industry, from the really big to the really very small companies, and across all the different technologies as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. In talking about energy security, I thought I'd start with a little introduction to what it is we are mostly using our energy on. These figures are for Scotland, but the picture across the UK is actually fairly similar. So while electricity catches a lot of the news, and it's one that's often talked about, actually our biggest use of energy is heat, as you can see from the diagram there. Now, Joe gave a great introduction as to the reasons behind the need for energy security and how renewable energy offers a solution there. So if I could have the next slide, please. This is how it looks at the moment on how we've decarbonised so far. So as you can see, that diagram in the middle, the electricity one, is actually quite a good picture. If you're in Scotland, about 85% of your electricity is coming from renewable sources. That has peaked during the pandemic at actually 98%, but that was because our electricity use was a bit lower. If we were looking at this across the UK, the amount of electricity from renewables, as Joe said earlier, would actually be around 40%. But as you can see, on heat and transport, we have barely scratched the surface. Even though electric vehicles are becoming much more common, the vast majority are still based on hydrocarbons, as is our heating. So those are the things that we need to address. Now, in terms of how we do it, after the Scottish and UK governments declared their net zero targets, the Climate Change Commission, the UK and Scottish government's official advisor on how to reach net zero by the least cost route, they did something that was called the 6th carbon budget, where they said, this is how we get to net zero by the least cost. If you're a nerd like me and my team, you would dig into the spreadsheets that underpinned that report and you'd find out what it said about renewables. So if I could have my next slide. This is based on the 6th carbon budget, what's called the balanced pathway to net zero. And these figures show the levels of renewable that we are going to need in order to get to net zero. So in the columns on the left there, that's the levels of renewable deployment we have at the moment, or based on last year's figures, which is the most recent ones we have. And in that top graph there, the figures on the right-hand side are the levels of deployment we need to reach by 2050. Because I speak for Scottish Renewables, the table below breaks that down to Scotland of what would be our share of what's going to happen there. So you can see from the diagram here that it is offshore wind that becomes the backbone of our energy system going out to 2050, and solar photovoltaic panels, PV panels on rooftops and ground mounted, they become the other core part of our energy system. But onshore wind also plays a very important part. I'll speak more about why we go for a mix of these later, but there's also, in terms of hitting our net zero and energy deployment targets and securing our energy security, is the speed at which we can build things out. So solar PV can be deployed within 12 months. To get a wind farm up takes about 18 months to 2 years. To build an offshore wind farm can take about 10 years. So you need to phase these technologies to keep on track. So that's the sort of figures we're aiming at. The reason that the offshore figures for 2045 in Scotland vary so much is because it depends on what assumptions you make about how much of that we build in English waters versus Scottish waters. So if I could have my next slide, please. These maps here show you where the distribution of our renewable energy is at the moment. So it may come as no surprise to you from the map on the left that the hydro, where we have most rain, is concentrated mostly in Scotland and Wales. And the solar, which is the map on the right with the yellow dots, is mostly concentrated in the south of England. You can see the central map there, which is onshore wind, is fairly evenly distributed across the UK. We can have the next slide, please. This shows you where our current offshore wind farms are at the moment. And as I said, when we were looking at those tables of deployment levels, where it would be, you can see that mostly offshore wind clusters around off the coast of the southeast of England at the moment. That's because the seabed there is pretty shallow and the engineering is much easier. But what is not shown on this map is that countries like the Netherlands and Germany are also building out in the southern North Sea. So that part of the North Sea is actually getting pretty crowded, which is why we're starting to see the offshore wind industry move more into Scotland and start to build out there. And if I can have my next slide. This is what's called ScotWind. This was a leasing round that Crown Estate Scotland did for areas of seabed to develop the new offshore wind in Scotland. This has now made Scotland the biggest floating offshore wind market in the world. Last week I was in Aberdeen for our floating offshore wind conference and we had 2,500 people over 2 days, 180 companies exhibiting from all over the world because of the huge amount of interest that this is forming. So if we go to the next slide there, Scotland can absolutely, and the UK can absolutely generate enough power to power itself from renewable sources. We can be energy sufficient. The thing that's often forgotten about, though, is although we can generate the electricity, as we move from a hydrocarbon-based energy system to a renewables-based energy system, storage becomes really important. At the moment, we store our energy in gas tanks and in strategic oil stores, although as we saw last winter when we had the energy price crisis, we don't store enough gas at the moment. We'll need to replace that with some kind of storage that can store renewable energy. So Aurora, who's the consultancy who looks into this, have been doing some of the figures of how much storage we will need on our system. So it will be about 30 gigawatts. We have about 3 gigawatts maybe of storage on the system at the moment, or electricity storage on the system at the moment. So it is a 10-fold increase. Scotland again can play a key role in that with what's called pump storage hydro. We have, as you can see there, about 3/4 of a gigawatt in Scotland. 3 gigs consented or in planning and 5 gig more ready to come along. So Scotland could do about 1/3 of the storage capacity that we'd need in the UK. And that would save consumers, as you can see, £690 million per year. The other big challenge around energy security, if I could come to my next slide, is there isn't, while we can electrify most things, we can electrify heating, we can electrify transport, we will still need some other fuels, and hydrogen is being put forward as the substitute fuel for things that are hard to electrify. And again, the Scottish Government did an assessment of Scotland's ability to produce hydrogen. So the offshore wind resource in Scotland is enough to meet our own energy needs about 10 times over. So in addition to using some of that to meet our energy needs, we can also use some of that capacity to generate hydrogen, both for our own uses and for export into countries like Germany, who are, for example, very heavily dependent on Russian gas at the moment. And again, you can see on the screen there, the most ambitious scenario that the Scottish Government looked at. What would actually happen is our hydrogen industry in Scotland could be bigger than the oil and gas industry back in the boom days in the 1980s when I was growing up in Aberdeenshire. So a lot to play for there. If I could come to the next slide, please. This, however, is the biggest challenge that we are going to have to overcome, because we can electrify heating in homes. We can also build citywide district heat networks, which is what a lot of the Scandinavian countries did in the 1970s energy crisis. And those are definitely the ways forward. But due to various economic factors, these technologies are currently much more expensive than the counterfactual, which is gas, even in the energy price crisis. So there's a lot of work being done at the moment to bring price parity between those two things so we can start the rollout of heat. And this will really be the key leverage point for securing our energy security, that transitioning of our buildings off of gas and onto alternative low carbon heating sources. The other thing that is really key to our energy security, which is often forgotten about, if I could have my next slide, here it is the energy infrastructure, the transmission networks and distribution networks for electricity across Scotland. This just shows you the major lines of what we have and what we need. To hit net zero, we are going to need to build more grids between now and 2045 than we did in the past 30 years combined. We are beginning to see public pushback on this, of people, saying, our village is being overtaken by these giant pylons and electricity lines. But unless we can transfer the renewable energy that we generate from where it's generated to where it's needed, we can't secure our energy future, and we remain dependent on those fossil fuels from often quite hostile countries around the world. So that remains one of the most serious challenges. So I will stop there. I think that's my 10 minutes up. Oh, sorry, I went over by 1 minute, Joe, there, but I believe we have questions that we're going to come to next.
Thank you very much, Morag. Yes, no, that was a lot covered. So I think we'll allow you the extra minute. So thank you very much to both the speakers. So yes, we'll move straight into the Q&A now. So to kick us off, we'll start with some of the questions we've received in advance. Although thank you for sending in all the questions that we've received so far. So the first one is a nice one to start on, because it's an area of overlap. So competing land uses. So if we start with you, Morag. So do you think that covering good arable land with solar panels or turbines is a green solution? Surely this would mean importing more food.
Okay, this is a question that comes up quite a lot, so I will answer it briefly, but if anybody wanted more details, we can send them on later. So in terms of onshore wind is rarely built on arable land. Where it has been, it's usually a farm diversification scheme. Farming, as I'm sure many of you will know, can be a very financially precarious career to pursue. And having that income from energy on your land can make the farms more sustainable, and has done so for quite a lot of Scottish farmers. So it's an important thing for maintaining our energy security. The rest of the onshore wind tends to be built on upland areas rather than arable. But that brings us over to large-scale ground-mounted solar, and it can be built on farmland. Again, lots of farmers have done that because of the diversification and the income, and it helps maintain their farms. Key thing to remember here is all commercial scale solar farms are built to be removable. So you aren't necessarily using the land, you're borrowing the land for that energy. Going forward, we expect to see more of that solar energy that we were talking about needing actually on combined hybrid sites, where the solar panels and the wind turbines are on the same site. But Solar Energy UK did do a calculation. If any of you were doing the quick maths for that level of deployment we're at now to where we need to be, we're going to increase the amount of solar about 5-fold. Even if you do that, that is less land than is currently used in the UK for golf courses. So that sort of gives you some of the comparative analysis. And the final thing to say is, although you can't grow crops underneath a commercial solar farm because of the shading, it is extremely good for grazing for sheep. So you can graze sheep underneath. And with the way the weather's been changing and the intensity of sunlight, shading for animals on farms is becoming more and more important to protect them from extreme temperatures. And it has been found that sheep can actually do better on a solar farm. This was in New Scientist, published in New Scientist fairly recently, because of the shading, and the shading of the grass led to less parching. So it can be a positive thing combined.
Thank you. No, that's interesting. I'm certainly we're looking out for sheep on solar farms from here. So there's a similar themed question here, David. This time for you on land again, and this is there simply not enough land in the UK? Will we always rely on imported food, even with new and innovative methods of farming?
No, there isn't enough land. There isn't enough viable arable land. So we do import, a significant amount of what we eat. The other challenge is not just the land itself, it's the quality of the soil. So as you plow more and more, and you apply fertilizer more and more, the soil tillage becomes finer and finer, and with increasing wind speeds, which we have, it tends to simply blow away. We've also had significant drought and significant floods. So if you look at the potato industry, first of all, they were producing, rather than tubers that size, they were producing tubers of about that size. And the number they've produced has been far, far smaller. So that industry is in quite a lot of trouble. We have quite a lot of acreage under glass. The big challenge that we have with that, and some other things like brassicas, for example, broccoli and cauliflowers, is that because of Brexit, there simply aren't enough people coming over here to pick them. So we've got farmers having to give things away or deciding not to plant, which has happened quite a bit here. So there are many, many different challenges. The lack of arable land compared to the actual consumption is a massive issue, and what's happening to the land and the climate and the workforce all contribute to the same challenge.
Excellent. Thank you. So moving now back to Morag, it's a different question we have now, looking on the theme of resilience. So we David explained the kind of setup of vertical farm, and that you've got this incredible controlled environment where the sunlight and everything is provided kind of artificially, so it isn't impacted by that kind of increasingly extreme heat and rainfall. How resilient is renewable energy under increasing climate extremes?
So very is the short answer to that. One of the key reasons that we need a diversity of renewable energy systems is because it balances things out. When it tends to be windy, it doesn't tend to be particularly sunny. When it's sunny, it doesn't tend to be particularly windy. We use offshore wind because the winds are more consistent offshore than they are onshore, and so on. And then having hydro as well, that giving you that basket gives you much more resilience. In terms of our changing weather patterns and whether or not our infrastructure can survive that, we're here in Scotland, and over this last weekend, huge amounts of rain, flooding, landslips. I haven't been able to get into the office for most of the week because the train line I use was under several tons of debris. Can it survive? Yes. So I actually did a little bit of interesting research when this question came in. So your average wind turbine is built to withstand a Category 3 hurricane. So that's wind speeds up to 129 miles per hour. The highest recorded wind speed in the UK was actually 173 miles per hour, so much higher, but that was on the top of the Cairngorms mountain plateau where we wouldn't be putting wind farms, so they can survive. I also found a really interesting piece of footage of a wind turbine in Texas that survived a tornado hitting it. And it was a Category 3 tornado, which I am reliably informed is 136 to 165 miles per hour. The blades bent, so were possibly damaged, but it did survive. So again, in Tornado Alley in Texas, we have seen tornadoes go through and shred turbine blades, but the towers remain standing, so the blades can be replaced. And likewise, we also install wind turbines in Antarctica, so they can survive that as well. So this infrastructure is pretty resilient.
Brilliant, thank you. And then moving now to the social, to kind of, or looking at this issue through a social lens, moving over to you, David. So we had a question which was, how will delivering food security on a warming planet affect the livelihood of some of the smaller and less well-off farmers?
Well, the economics around growing food vary massively around the world. There are 570 million farms on the planet. 75% of them are smaller than a hectare, and half of them are smaller than half a hectare. Automating those farms you could regard as pretty well impossible. So the number of places where you could bring this kind of technology to bear actually is relatively limited. There are big swathes of the world where the economics at the moment probably don't stack up, but I had a very interesting conversation with Adam Bergman, the head of agri-food at Citigroup yesterday, and we were talking, speculating, in which year are people going to stop talking about the cost of food and start talking about just the availability of it. In other words, you have to pay almost anything because otherwise you just can't get your food. And we have had shortages, empty shelves, incredibly poor quality fresh fruit and veg in our major supermarkets this year, and it's been the worst it's been probably since World War II in terms of those food shortages. But then take two countries that you would think would be very similar to one another, Austria and Switzerland. In Switzerland, they have massive amounts of hydro schemes, huge availability of cheap electricity, and the energy use is about 70% of the running cost of a vertical farm. They also place a high premium on top quality fresh produce. So you've got a low input cost and actually high wholesale prices. In Austria, next door, exactly the same environment, Alps, you would imagine it would be the same. It's not. Energy is much more expensive, and they tend to eat an awful lot more meat. And therefore the price of fresh fruit and veg is lower. So the economics in these two neighboring countries just don't match at all. And so you have to go country by country, and then sometimes region by region, and then you have to look at the viability of each farm. So I'm afraid there is no one simple answer here. It comes back to my favorite phrase, it depends.
Brilliant, thanks, David. We're running very tight on time now, so I think we need to sum up at this point. We like to finish on a positive. So can you, in kind of 20 seconds each, talk about what's the kind of one key? And we've had some really excellent questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but there were questions basically saying what's the key positive development that you're looking for to really encourage adoption of this particular solution. And please try and keep these to kind of 20 seconds. So Morag, over to you first, please, very quickly.
Rapid deployment of grid enforcements across the UK to carry that cheap electricity to where it's needed.
Fantastic. And actually you addressed one of the questions, which was about kind of looking at the grid and energy storage there. Fantastic. And over to you, David, for a similar question. And actually there was a question about the policy side, but again, just briefly, what are you looking for in a few words?
Rolling out giga farms in the parts of the world that are willing to support them and have a policy in place. Sadly, we don't have that here yet. We were, vertical farming was named in the SNP manifesto for the last election, but we've yet to see a significant amount of effort put into rolling them out here at home. So we'll continue to do it, but we'll be doing it across other parts of the world.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So that's all the time we have for questions. So just to close then, we've explored the vulnerabilities of our existing food and energy systems and how local modular solutions in the form of clean energy and vertical farming can potentially be scaled up to tackle these issues, as well as helping to meet our net zero targets. But it will take continued investment and effort to meet the needs of all communities as the planet warms. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say a big thank you to both our expert speakers, to David and to Morag, and to all of you listening for taking the time to join us. The recording of today's webinar will be available to view on demand and will be posted on our website over the next few days. Do please share it. We'd be grateful if you could take a couple of minutes to fill out the feedback form as well. And most importantly, thank you all once again. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope to see you all at the next Green Shoots event. So thank you very much all, and goodbye.
Bye-bye.